Pucks with Haggs is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. This is the 15th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a bunch of hockey things here now that the Stanley Cup playoffs have come to an end. We have a winner. We can discuss that. We can start to get into the offseason a little bit. We got a few things to dig into as far as the Bruins and hockey go, and we have my longtime friend from the Standard Times, Mick Colageo, been covering the Bruins almost 30 years for them, where it got all kinds of Bruins stories and information and knowledge we can glean from Mick. But first, I want to acknowledge our sponsors for the show, for the Pucks with Haggs podcast. First of all, FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS network. You can continue to go there and go to fanduel.com/Boston and get a no sweat first bet. Up to $1,000, fanduel.com/Boston, no sweat first bet, up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, that's always a good deal. And our other sponsor and my personal favorite, Factor Meals, America's #1 ready to eat meal kit, ready in less than 2 minutes, friendly food, quick food in the summertime when you need it. It's very convenient meal plans that come right to you, not frozen, healthy. So head to factormeals.com/Haggs50. Use the code Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. That's an awesome deal. That's factormeals.com/Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box at Factor Meals. So with the sponsors thanked and acknowledged, we'll move on to Mick. Mick, what'd you think of the playoffs in general? Bruce Cassidy and the Vegas Golden Knights winning at the end, and just your sort of like thoughts as you were watching the playoffs unfold, and then the Stanley Cup final happened between the Panthers and the Golden Knights.
Well, really, thanks for having me, first of all, on 15th episode. I guess that puts me in the top 15.
There you go.
I don't know if I get a limited no trade with that. But
you can't get traded to Buffalo, Mick. That's the best part.
Right. Happy for Bruce, number one.
Yep.
Number two, it just blew my mind how they beat up the big bully. I was amazed at how the Bruins could not contend with Bennett's line, especially Bennett. Tkachuk was an assassin and an amazing opportunist who stood on the shoulders of the physicality that Bennett brought. And Verhaeghe was like the deputy opportunist. And when he was on the line, obviously was at the very end. But they went back to Cousins. But I wasn't even sure after watching the prior rounds that Vegas would get a game. But then the 10 days went by, and it reminded me of 2019. It reminded me of other playoffs where the Bruins had to do a lot of waiting around before they played, and then were never the same. And I think Florida gave up those first two games. They were a hot mess in those games 1 and 2. And when the series shifted, they played much better games, and they have not been a great home team throughout this playoff. They've been a better road team. So
as with a lot of teams in these playoffs, it's crazy how they work. Yeah.
And then they don't have Tkachuk at the end. So game 5 was kind of decided before it happened. It's amazing that one player can have that much of an effect, but that's true. And in this case, how good of a series would we have gotten? I don't really know, but I got to say, I really underrated the Golden Knights. I didn't realize how good Nicholas Roy was. Here's a fourth-line center. There's no way this guy's going forward in his career as a fourth-line center. To me, he was like the second coming of Wayne Cashman. He was so good in traffic and on the boards, winning pucks. And I was just amazed with the guys that they have on that team and how much they've matured. Riley Smith is a perfect example of a guy who I thought was a really soft player when Boston had him. And I didn't think they were wrong.
He was.
And then the Panthers weren't wrong. The Stars weren't wrong. But, even in 18, he wasn't the player we saw this past week or this past month. I just was really impressed by his maturation. And, he got to a point where he was like, hey, this is what it is. And let's get out there and compete. And he did. And good for him. Yeah.
And, in general, with the Golden Knights, I feel like they take their cues, obviously, from Bruce Cassidy and the coaching staff, but also from Mark Stone, one of the best players in the NHL, best two-way players in the NHL, but a guy that I think is often underrated because he's just solid. He's not spectacular. He's not flashy. it's some of the things he does. It's almost in a Bergeron-esque way where it's just good, hard, smart hockey and just winning battles and being in the right place and being intelligent and knowing where the puck is going and reading the plays. But like so many players in the team are like that, right? They're not flashy players. Marchessault, just a solid all-around hockey player, very good offensive player. Alex Pietrangelo, not a flashy number one defenseman, but a two-time cup winner and a stud number one defenseman that knows how to win in the playoffs. And Mark Stone, they had so many players like that where they didn't dazzle you or impress you in any of these rounds with the things that they were doing. They were just a damn good hockey team, deep, strong, good two-way team, played at both ends. Jack Eichel bought in and he became one of those too. He made some flashy plays here or there. Probably the flashiest player they had as far as skill goes, but just fell in line with what everybody else was doing. It was the story of their run was like you kept waiting for a team to beat them, thinking that you kind of underrated them the whole time. At least I did. I did.
I didn't know how good Chandler Stevenson was.
No, or Adin Hill. You're looking at him and you're saying, is Adin Hill going to be able to do this for, a playoff run? And he ended up doing it. And he's probably made himself a ton of money because he's a UFA at the end of the year. And he'll be one of those guys that a team will go after and say, this could be our number one Stanley Cup winner, had that run. And, who knows if he's going to be or not, but he's probably played himself into a nice situation going forward too.
Sure. Yeah. It's a career maker for him. He seized an opportunity. What did he set a record or something for most victories in the Stanley Cup playoffs for a guy who did not play in the opening round?
Yes.
Yeah. So
had never played in a playoff game. It had never played more than 25 games in an NHL season.
Yeah.
Going into this. Crazy.
I always liked Theodore, but the move that he made to retain that puck high on the right boards at the right point, dance on the puck pursuer. I'm trying to remember who it was, but he eluded him right. He eluded him left, danced to the middle and scored that goal with that perfect shot over the shoulder against the grain. They just were outstanding in so many ways. They were clutch. They saved their best for last, and they can play any way you want. But the Bruins, I know we were going to transition there, have been trying to be that team. We can play any way you want. Well, right. They didn't play any way you want. I was a little disappointed. I thought they had turned the corner. I thought they had the grit this time. I thought they had the speed this time. I thought they had enough to get past a team like Florida. But when you let a physical team off the mat and they get the series to 7, the physical team always wins. I mean, I go back the Bruins 2011, the Blues in 2019. It's if they
with the Bruins being on the reverse end of it in 2019. Absolutely,
that's right. They were the Canucks in that series.
Yep.
Yeah. So too power play reliant. And squawking about the refs and the other teams lifting the trophy.
Yeah, and the big thing that was a surprise to me in that series, and really was the story of the series in a lot of ways, was just how they could not handle the forecheck of the Florida Panthers.
Yeah,
their defensemen really struggled first to handle it, and then started hearing footsteps, and then started making all kinds of bad mistakes, throwing the puck up the middle of the ice, and forced the forecheck of Florida forced them into doing things they didn't do all season, and all of a sudden they started happening to them in the playoffs, and they did the same thing to Toronto after that, and
even worse.
Yes, and for me though, when I was watching that, I was wondering, are they going to be able to sustain that hair on fire, we're coming after you, pounding you forecheck for 2 months and 4 playoff rounds? And that's really what I think kind of happened to them at the end too, is the style of play and the way that they were playing. They couldn't sustain it at the end. They were
Wile E. Coyote had run off the cliff and he didn't look down yet.
Exactly. And, he finally looked down right at the end against the Knights and started plummeting. And the cloud was left there all by itself. But that's kind of what I thought happened was
I wish they didn't have to wait around so long so we could see a better version of them.
100%.
And then we could have gotten a truer read on it. But but not taking anything away from the Knights. They stood up in a way that none of the other opponents did.
No, and that play, the microcosm of that series and what you're talking about and what I'm talking about is Tkachuk destroying Jack Eichel, knocking him out of the game temporarily. Mm-hmm. He goes to the room and he comes back in the next period and, Florida scores a goal and you think they're starting to get a foothold. They're gaining some momentum. And then all of a sudden Eichel makes a great pass to Marchessault right in the middle of the net. complete defensive zone coverage, like mess from a hot mess, a dumpster fire from the Panthers, and they score a goal and they're off and running again. It was the perfect response from Eichel, the perfect response from that team.
And then
Florida Panthers playing that way. And it was also, to your point, it looked like they had been off for a week, 10 days, the way that they covered the zone in that play. They had 4 guys over by the sideboards covering Eichel and one other guy and completely crowding the puck. And there's nobody in front of their net. Like it's something, honestly, I don't see my Squirts teams that I coach, Finn's team, do that. Cause I yell at them 1D in front of the net at all times when the puck is in the D zone. I'm screaming it from the bench at all times when that happens. So like, I think everybody fell asleep on that one, and it speaks to the rust that had gathered. But I thought that was just the perfect sequence, those 2 plays, of exactly how that series played out. Well, with the NBA playoffs over and the Stanley Cup playoffs over, Major League Baseball is now in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the baseball action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. That's right, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS network. Right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/Boston to join today. I love FanDuel. Great promotions every day beyond the no-sweat first bets. Safe and secure app that you can use. It's really easy to navigate around and to find exactly what you want to bet on. You get paid instantly when you do actually win, whether you're betting on the pathetic Red Sox or not. I'll leave that up to you. But don't miss your first chance to snag a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 when you sign up for FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/Boston to sign up. FanDuel's the official partner of Major League Baseball.
The other thing the Bruins failed to do that the Knights did was proactive physicality.
Yeah.
I was really disappointed that over the course of 7 games, the Bruins really failed to put a body on Montour. They failed to put a body on Forsling. They failed to take advantage of the slow speed of Stahl. They failed to take advantage of Gudas. Gudas could be an adventurous player. Even in his more refined, older, smarter version of him, he can be. You can get him. And a Knights
he's pretty slow too. You got to take advantage of that too. And
they just did not exploit there. They didn't get in there. I thought certain Bruins were terrific. I thought Coyle was excellent.
Yep.
I just thought that there weren't enough guys who were paying the price and making things happen and playing outside their comfort zone and taking it to them. And there was no cumulative effect of weight on those defensemen. And the fact that there was plenty on Boston's and none on theirs, now you're drawing Clifton in. And Clifton hadn't played at the beginning, which was really, I thought that was an underrated part of the mismanagement, because I thought that Clifton really thrived under Montgomery during the season. And I was disappointed that he was the odd man out. Because what happened there was a physicality lack of matchup there. Because Clifton not only withstands, he hits. He'll hit first. He'll hit back. He'll hit ahead. It's like, and they didn't have enough of that in that series. And that's one of the things the Golden Knights had all over every one of their other opponents.
Yeah. The issue, though, with Clifton, I guess, becomes like his confidence is such a yo-yo. And if he starts to get down in any way, or,
well, and then that's drawing him in a lineup later. He was no good.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he goes in game 6 and he's an absolute disaster. And a big part of why they ended up, that game 6 was such a mess was a lot of the mistakes that he was making, because I think at that point he'd been out of the lineup for a few games and they put Grzelcyk in. And I honestly felt like Grzelcyk was better for that series because he was able to handle their forecheck more, and he was able to get it up the ice and get around them and get it up quick. And, that was part of Montgomery's folly of the things he made mistakes with, was game 6, taking Clifton, Grzelcyk out and putting Clifton in after that sort of mishandle that Grzelcyk and Ullmark had behind the net in game 5 in overtime when they lost that game. So, but there's a lot.
I know they like floorboard on the penalty kill, and there's late that reminds them of Chara a little bit and all of that. But putting him in at the beginning of the series and flipping things around there, I don't think that worked out for them at all.
No, there was a lot of things that didn't work out. Hampus Lindolm was terrible as well.
He was.
And that really is a killer.
I don't know if anybody vetted this broken foot story.
Yeah. Well, he was wearing a boot at the end of the year. Like, he said it to a Swedish news outlet. I believe him, but he was also playing 20 minutes a night at the end of the season. and playing throughout the playoffs and telling us at breakup day that he was fine. So like, how much of that is him really being hurt? How much of that is looking for something to sort of pin it on when you really didn't play well? Like, this is why some people were sort of putting it out there. They wanted Lindholm, to potentially be moved because they don't like what they've seen out of the playoffs. They don't like what they've seen out of the playoffs in the last couple of years. But like, I want to see at least one more playoff out of him.
That's right. I agree. Well, I'm with you on this. I getting run over by Svechnikov is one thing.
Yes.
That's totally one thing. This year, I was really disappointed because I've really enjoyed his play. I enjoyed his season, especially early on before Charlie McAvoy was in the lineup. I thought he was fantastic because he had to be the lead guy back there, and he was.
Orlov was kind of playing like he did during the regular season in the playoffs. He was sort of like, and even to more of a like sort of rover level of like being all over the place at times, but being really aggressive offensively. And like, he kind of, was doing what Lindholm did at the beginning of the year when McAvoy wasn't there. And Lindholm just looked like he was, handling grenades when he had the puck on his stick and just didn't want anything to do with it. But
he didn't want to be in that minefield. There's no question about it.
It certainly didn't seem like it. So let's get to a little bit of Bruins news here. The end of the week, this week is the official offseason for the NHL. The Stanley Cup finals are over. So a couple days after the end of the Stanley Cup finals, that's when the buyout window opens for all the teams across the NHL. And I think, I've written about it. A lot of people have. I'm sure you've either tweeted about it, written about it, thought about it. But I think Mike Reilly becomes a very likely candidate to be bought out by the Boston Bruins.
Wearing the buyout bullseye.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it makes too much sense.
Bullseye.
When you only have $5 million in cap space like the Bruins do, you only have like 7 forwards signed, you have a surplus of defensemen, a plethora of guys that you're probably going to even have to trade somebody after you bought out Mike Reilly as well. And you can get a lot of savings. I think it's a $2.3 million savings this first year in the buyout.
And the second year, as you pointed out in your article, is nearly irrelevant because of the cap increase that's anticipated when the COVID escrow part is over and that they can get back to business as usual.
And they have a lot of cap space anyway, too, on top of that. So I think the cap, I think, is a 1-year pain period that they're going to have to go through this coming year, where they're just going to have to get through it, try not to make too many moves that are long-term damaging for them, and figure out a way to power through, make some shrewd moves now, and then they can get to the other side. And as you mentioned, the cap will go up. They're going to have a lot more cap spaces, more contracts are coming off. So, Mike Reilly, I think, is an extremely viable candidate for the buyout, and it makes all the sense in the world. They haven't used the buyout much, though, lately, especially. It's Jimmy Hayes and Dennis Seidenberg are the last couple that they've done. So it'll be interesting to see if they get full green lights from ownership to go out and put some dead money out there that the Jacobs aren't going to be getting anything in return from Mike Reilly for a couple seasons while paying him money. But I think it makes sense on paper to do it.
If they bury him in Providence like they did this past season, are they better off with the cap for next season?
No.
If they just keep going like that? No,
they have dead money on the cap that's more than they would save with the buyout. In 2 years, I think it maybe in 2 years he'd be gone, right? He's only got 1 year left. The 2 year thing is because of the buyout.
Yeah.
But I think it makes sense if
you got to do everything based on this coming season.
Yeah, I think it's $1 million extra, maybe somewhere in that range of extra.
That can make a huge difference on a personnel.
Well, it could be a player. It could be a very viable player, like at the bottom of your lineup, a fourth line guy.
Sure.
An extra forward, an extra D.
If a team ever needed to solve 3 roster problems internally, the time is now. Remember good old 1988 when Craig Janney and Bob Joyce, they come up from the U.S. and Canadian Olympic teams in time. It was like a great trade deadline pickup. Then it happened again in 91, 92 with Juneau coming from Canada, Hines and Donato from the U.S., and simultaneously Glenn Murray comes in from juniors. And it's like a whole different hockey team than the one that played that whole season. And it set them up for the decade, really. In this right now, in the immediate, there's people nibbling at the bottom 6. There's a few guys nibbling there, but is there really anybody there that under any normal circumstances would the Bruins ever consider taking a player like Mason Lowry and and putting him in an NHL lineup rather than giving him a full AHL season. Historically, that's not how they do it. He plays in Providence this coming season. And then maybe at the end of the season, if he's knocking it out of the park, then you look at him that way. Right now, I mean, these internal solutions are, this is when that's supposed to happen. And boy, if there's a time for them to prove that their system is underrated, and it is rated poorly, then it's now.
Well, I do think we are going to see some of those players this coming year, and that's going to factor into, when we say there's only 7 forwards signed right now, I don't think we're including Oscar Steen, Mark McLaughlin, Jacob Lauko, who I think are all going to play a lot next year, at least definitely McLaughlin and Lauko. And I think Steen's on a one-way contract, so I would expect that he's going to at least get a look or, get some period of time as a bottom 6 guy to see if he can do it or not. But I think I do have a feeling that some of those guys are going to be in there, and it is going to be not nearly as deep a team as this past season. And they're just going to have to get by with some of those guys, at least until the trade deadline. And maybe they can, work some kind of salary cap magic at that point to free up some space to get somebody if they really need it. But I put it this way. They're not going to be winning 65 games, putting up 135 points this year, even if Krecji or Bergeron are back. I think they're still a playoff team, but I think because they have to have so many of these sort of like fringe players that have to establish themselves in the lineup and playing somewhat significant roles, if they're in there every night in a 3rd or 4th line role, there's going to be pain associated with that, especially in Jakobs Borrell on the back end too. If it turns out that he has to, because they put Mason Lohrei in Providence, they have to play him most nights up here.
And you know what? Well, he was good before he blew that ACL. It's been tough getting back. But there was a couple games there where he was good. And then there's a couple where he's not. You say, okay, what's it going to be here? I think this is his fork in the road season. It's now or never for him as a Bruin going forward.
Yeah, no doubt. But that's, I think there is, unless they can work some serious trades, which, not having 1st round picks or 2nd round picks for the next couple of years, not having a well thought of a prospect and development system at this point. I
think every night they pray that Matthew Poitras is Barry Peterson.
Of course, that somehow Fabian Lysell wakes up tomorrow and he's David Pastrnak too. Like, wouldn't that be great?
No kidding.
But like
Rick Middleton.
I just don't, because of the assets, because of the all-in nature of last year, because of the salary cap situation, it's going to be tough sledding next year. There's no question about it. They're too good not to be a playoff team. I think they have too many good players and their goaltending is too good. And, I don't
know. That division's getting tougher.
It is. But like, if you start the season, let's say you start the season with let's say you don't trade any of the goalies. Okay. Let's say you start with Ullmark and Swayman as your 1-2. Let's say you have Lindholm and McAvoy as your top 2 defensemen. Let's say Bergeron comes back, Krecji doesn't. So you still have Bergeron, Marchand, Pastrnak. Maybe you have Taylor Hall, Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha,
DeBrusk.
You know what I mean? Like when you start,
and DeBrusk might be a lot better next season than he was at the end of this one, because let's face it, you break 2 bones winning the Winter Classic, and then he never really quite the same player, even though he had some high moments in the second half of the season. It was difficult for him to sustain that. And he turned the corner so far in the first half of last season that I feel like we're going to see more of that player than the player we saw at the end of the year.
Yeah, no doubt. And let's take a timeout right here to talk about one of our sponsors, Mick. It is finally the summertime. The springtime is over. So Finn is paring down the sports, thank God. He played lacrosse, baseball, hockey, and soccer this spring. So there was a lot of running around to all of his stuff. Now lacrosse season has ended, the regular one. He's on a club lacrosse team, but soccer has ended, baseball has ended. So now he's just down to like spring and summer hockey, which is like one game a week. And, maybe he's going to start going to this Max Pro camp at Dexter starting in a couple of weeks. Max Grzelcyk, you might remember him, a former New York Islanders draft pick, runs it. He's a great guy, and he does a really good job. But like my point is that it's starting to slow down, thank God. But we do have Factor Meals to help us out. America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit when it does get busy, when it does get crazy, when we do need a quick meal. They fuel you up fast with flavorful and nutritious ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Takes less than 2 minutes to cook them. They're fresh, never frozen, meals ready in 2 minutes, like I said. They have calorie-conscious options for my wife, Alyssa, who likes to go the healthy route. They are going upscale with some of the things they're offering now, like surf and surf meal options, roasted garlic, filet mignon, and shrimp, and Cajun spiced shrimp and salmon, which is like right in my wheelhouse. This is the kind of stuff I'm all about. So it's got everything for everybody. There's 34 plus chef prepared, dietitian approved weekly options for meals. You can get snacks, you can get breakfast items. Like it's a great deal. So if you want to get Factor Meals, go to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use the code Haggs50 to get 50% off of your first box. It's a great deal. I've tried it. It's fantastic. I recommend it to you. We love these ready to make meal kits, especially when we're on the go with our kids. So one more time, that's factormeals.com/Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. You won't be sorry if you go to Factor Meals. It gets the Haggs thumbs up seal of approval. All right. Let's move on to the next item, Mick, and we touched on this a little bit. Bruce Cassidy winning the cup. There's obviously like a revisionist thing going on right now in Boston, where people are saying he should have stayed. They should not have fired him. If he stayed here, we would have won the cup. Fans saying this, and look, I understand the knee-jerk reaction of being angry when a coach is fired. A lot of people were angry when Claude Julien was fired, rightfully so. Winning is, yes, exactly. You were the chairman of the club, and I didn't like it either because I liked Claude personally. He was a good guy. Mm-hmm. But winningest coach in Bruins franchise history, won the cup in 2011. Obviously a really good coach. But it was time, and I think we learned that when Bruce came in. And it was the same thing here. I think the season
was heading so fast, so it was totally understandable that they did what they did. They had to do it. And even Claude said afterward, it was time.
Yeah. And I think Bruce Cassidy in retrospect has realized that too. And he talked about it in some interviews where I think he realized that coming so close in 2019 and not getting there, it became an obsession with him, I think, to win the cup. And it really became something that he was driving hard for. And maybe at times he was driving those players extra hard and maybe didn't even realize it because he was so intent on getting a little bit better to get over that hump that they weren't able to in Game 7 in 2019. As he says, I just want my name on the damn cup. You finally got it. Good for him. But I mean, I'm of the strong belief that it was time here. The message needed to change. They were not going to win. He was probably going to get fired during the season if he had stayed for this last year. And then they would have been scrambling to try to find somebody at some point. But obviously, I don't think they would have had a record season. I don't think they would have had such high hopes going into the postseason. And I don't think they would have had the Vegas storybook end if he had remained in Boston this year.
You wouldn't have gotten the season you got out of Freddie. Yep. I mean, they traded Jack Studnicka, but I'm looking at the prior season and thinking, okay, Sweeney said it's probably on us that we messed up his development. We didn't do, and I'm thinking I don't really know what he's alluding to. But when the situation sort of unfolded that Studnicka, would play with great confidence down in Providence, he come to Boston and it just wasn't there. And then it would take him a couple of weeks to get going again in Providence, and it'd build up to it. So there was definitely on one hand, Don Sweeney is trying to draft and develop and think from an internal standpoint his hockey team. On the other hand, he strategically places a veteran obstacle in the way of every prospect in order to make them earn their spot. And I think that his prospects, for the most part, have not been good enough to override that. Yep. Now, you might look and say, well, what about Charlie McAvoy? Well, he wouldn't have even played that Ottawa series in 2017 had there not been an emergency injury situation. Right. That brought about the revelation that permanently made him a Boston Bruin going forward. it launched his career. So it takes circumstances are different for different players, but there was definitely a sense by the end of the Bruce Cassidy era here that in order for this management to be satisfied that they had a good system and had good prospects, they felt like they needed to have a different coach.
Yeah, and they needed to change some of the ways they were doing business. They needed more out of their defensemen offensively. And you can debate, would they have gotten more out of their defensemen with Cassidy coaching Lindholm and McAvoy at the top of the defenseman corps for a whole season? Certainly they would have. But
you
would
could say the same thing about Claude.
Yeah, would they have gotten
the team that Claude had? No.
Would they have gotten a career year out of Connor Clifton this year? No, he would not have.
Right, exactly.
Would Brandon Carlo have been one of the best looking defensemen in the playoffs like you would? No. Like he was getting things out of other players, namely, like you mentioned, Trent Frederick.
Thomas Nosek.
Brandon Carlo, Thomas Nosek, Nick Foligno. There was a bunch of players that were markedly and much better under Jim Montgomery than they were under Bruce Cassidy. And I don't think that's an accident or, a coincidence. And
if I get a chance to talk to Montgomery at some point, just have a hockey conversation, I think one of the things I want to address with him is there was a certain 10-game patch in the middle of the season somewhere where all of these easy speed bodies that the Bruins had in the lineup, Marchand was getting up to speed around the same time that Zacha was really starting to catch fire. Taylor Hall was starting to feel it. And these guys who's have that kind of stride, that one push and they're in a different area code, it was no longer one guy here or one guy there on a different line. It was a team of guys. Coyle is in that class of skater. And it got to a point where all of a sudden Foligno and Frederick, their game had meaning because the Bruins started having cumulative pressure with the forecheck, line after line after line. The way the Claude teams used to do it by being heavy, these guys were doing it with speed. It wasn't so much hitting, but it was more that Messier skating, that Glenn Murray's forechecking pressure, the way those guys could just get in on defensemen and hurry them. And I thought that this piece of the Bruins attack really started making me believe that they could be the team wearing the ball caps at the end. And that went away. And I don't know if it was a series of injuries. I know Hall had an injury. Marchand obviously faded after his midseason peak.
Foligno had the injury.
Yeah, so there was a lot going on there. That guys they were greater than the sum of their parts at a certain point of the season, and then at that part of their game faded. And I felt like that was key to them not being able to get anything going, anything cumulative against Florida's defensemen in that series. And I don't know if it's possible to reconstruct that going forward. But that was an element to their game that I really enjoyed for the little bit that we got to see it.
No, there was a lot to enjoy over the course of that regular season. I think everybody believed that something special was going on by the end of the year when they started the postseason. It made it surprising when they were not at times able to match sort of the physicality and the intensity and everything that Florida was throwing at them and couldn't counter what Florida was doing. And, it's an easy second guess. And I actually was looking at a podcast that Jim Montgomery was on earlier today where he addressed some of this. But there's also like the elements, and it's, sort of more simple to look at it this way. But it's the element of it. It looked like they were still trying to go for the record late into the year and achieve those records. And I understood why they were doing it because they were trying to keep the pedal to the metal. But I think it also ended up with some of their players getting banged up as they were doing that. And, yes, Bergeron did sit for a few games, but he injured his back in that last game against Montreal. And, that's an easy second guess for everybody organizationally about that after the fact. But Lindholm gets hurt late in the year. Krecji was battling injuries down the stretch and into the season. Yeah, Linus, absolutely. And he was hurt in the last home game against Washington. Ullmark aggravated something. So, part of that is bad luck.
Yeah,
about it. Part of that is just being an unfortunate banged up team, like key players being banged up at the wrong time of the year, starting the playoffs. And that's part of the reason Florida didn't win is their players got banged up towards the end and they weren't healthy enough at the end of the year. And that's something you always hear from players, coaches, management, whoever. is that part of it is luck and staying healthy and all that. But like
their playoff was like Boston's regular season in that
right.
regard.
But part of it too is that like was too much importance put on the regular season, setting that record, and too much stress and, focus on that rather than really truly being ready for the playoffs in every way that they could. And were they, pushing on the gas too hard at the end of the regular season, and it didn't leave them with enough to start the playoffs? Like it's an unanswerable question, but it's something you look at and can pick apart and say, I think I saw that and I had a problem with that. Because the results were that players were banged up and it looked like the wear and tear of the regular season did it to them.
Yeah. I don't know if there's you can't really refute that. On the other hand, you can't prove it either. It's just going to be one of those things. That season's always going to haunt because that seemed like a very complete hockey team. The 2001-02 Red Wings were a very old team and they managed to do it. Now, Bergeron and Krecji as a number 1 and 2 center, won the Stanley Cup. They would have been the first team to average the age that they were at between each other, which was 37 and 36, so 36 plus whatever.
Yep.
Since 1971, John Beliveau and Henri Richard were averaging a half a year older than that.
And that tells you something too, that can you win a Stanley Cup when your top 2 centers are 37, 38 years old? Can they sustain for 2 months every other night that level of play that you need to have in the playoffs when most of the guys that are coming to the forefront and rising to the top are 26, 25, 29, like the Matthew Tkachuks of the world.
That's right. And how old were these guys when they won it?
Yes.
Right? So it's quite the domain of the guys who are old enough to know what to do and young enough to still have their bodies. And there are exceptions, but when it's in the center core, it's the central artery of your hockey team, then it was too good to be true that those 2 guys were going to last the entire way and then play 2 months of playoffs too. I was hoping because they, I thought Montgomery was masterful in integrating Nosek to the penalty kill and making Coyle a lead penalty killer and trying to take some of that heavy lifting away from Bergeron.
Yep.
And that's why Don Sweeney made the acquisition in the first place, that this was the theory. And he was right. That was what they needed to do. It's still at the end, that's what happened.
And I think that's the sort of path moving forward for Bergeron if he stays and if he wants to play. And I hope he does because he's still a fantastic player. He should win the Selke again this year. He's still, the best 2-way center, I think, in the league on any given night. And a winner and a Hall of Fame player and a great leader, like the entire package. He's just an excellent role.
He still has his hard skills.
Of course.
And he was badly injured and he was playing, and that's why you get the -6 over the final 3.
Yep.
And that to me is not a referendum on him in any regard. He's a competitor. He wanted to play. The Bruins went with it. It didn't work out. Tragic, but it happened.
But I think at this point, the path forward for him is, if he does continue to play, is even if, you sort of quote unquote still consider him your number 1 center, he's more like your 3rd line center. And the minutes that he plays, the role that he plays, Pavel Zacha and Charlie Coyle play harder minutes. Play much more bigger minutes, play a lot more of the roles and take much more ownership of the center position moving forward. And he kind of slides down as far as usage goes to try to keep him, as fresh as you can for the postseason and try to keep him playing at his optimal level for as long as you can when you get to that point. And I think that's kind of what has to happen. And that's going to be difficult for a player that's used to playing in all the tough situations, used to playing in every situation, used to doing it all. But I think that's kind of what should and has to happen to get the most out of him. And I think
Ray Bork went through it.
Yeah, and he'll obviously be on board with it because he's a smart guy and he's a team guy and he understands. But I do think that's an element of it too. And I've wondered this for years, the last few years. Even if the stars align for the Bruins, would they be able to get over the finish line when their centers are getting to an age where it's really hard to expect them to play 20 minutes a night every other night in the playoffs for 2 months? That's a lot to ask.
Okay, hot take. I don't think it's in their best interest to bring back both Bergeron and Krecji.
No, I don't think so either.
I think it's better for them if it's just Bergeron.
Yep.
And I love David Krecji. Love him. I just think that the situation of both those guys in those positions on this hockey team it's too much of a grind for the body at this stage.
I agree. The 12-year anniversary of the Bruins Stanley Cup was a couple days ago. Yesterday. And, we're taping this on Friday, and they were playing the Game 7 on NHL Network in Vancouver. You were there, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I was there. You were there. Everybody was there. What are your memories of just that postseason run, that team, and sort of like, that night when they won Game 7?
Well, I remember talking to one of the Ferraro brothers, the twin brothers that played on the Providence Bruins team that had won the Calder Cup and went back to within one overtime goal of being in the final that they would have won the next year. And saying to me at a certain point, I love this team. It's somebody different every night.
Yep.
That was the comment. And that's how it was, whether it was Michael Ryder's glove save, Andrew Ferentz with a big goal at the Bell Center. And everybody knows what happened after that.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Like, he's doing a street hockey thing in Boston tomorrow, Ferentz.
That's right, yeah.
Over the weekend. And I was considering bringing Finn to it and introducing him. And I know Finn and like a couple of his buddies, I know the thing that they would be most excited to talk to him about.
They'd bring one hockey glove.
Is flipping the bird to the Montreal Canadiens fans after he scored a goal in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's gonna be hard.
Something what I think kids every kid that age dreams of doing, but would never do in a million years because
it's like Brian Trocchi in the Brian Bellows video. He can never live it down. Oh, well.
But it's true. It was a different player every night, and it was the right time for that team, the right place, the right moment. Tim Thomas was unbelievable. And you have to have that if you're going to win the cup too, as we saw with Adin Hill. It was just seemed like all the pieces came into place for that team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were, and they played with a method, and they took away the legs of the opponent's defensemen. I remember Game 4, and at Madison Square Garden in 13, and I'm watching them. It was next to DJ Bean, and the Rangers had Hammerlick on defense.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the Bruins' fourth line in overtime started hemming them in. And I could see Hammerlick couldn't move anymore. It was almost like he was skating like he was at the end of a pregame warm-up. And he just started skating through the crowd, going to the bench right in the middle of the battle. He leaves the scene. I'm thinking, I said, DJ, it's over. I said, the Bruins going to start getting their changes. Once they get their changes, this is going to end. Here comes Krecji. Krecji gets over the boards. One bounce off the boards. Next thing you know, the Rangers score the goal to win the game and send it back to Boston. I just couldn't believe my eyes. You just never know with this game of hockey how it's going to turn out. You think you think you're seeing it unfold right before you, and then something completely opposite to that happens. You just never know. Sometimes you're leaning in on the guy on the ropes, and he sidesteps and throws the uppercut, and you're doing a face plant on the ring for 3 minutes. You just don't know. But that's that team. I remember Game 7 in Vancouver. Mark Recchi. There's a puck laying beside Roberto Luongo, and Recchi's on the wrong side of the puck, and he dives over Roberto Luongo, swan dive to go get that puck. A moment later, Rich Garvin of the Worcester Telegram is grabbing my elbow because I'm standing up. And I just remember saying, they're going to win. And it was that play by Mark Recchi that brought me into that moment that I just knew they didn't come here to lose. They're going to win the game. And he was like, Mick, sit down, calm down. Get a hold of me. I was in a different world. I was in a different universe.
So, it's true, though. Like, you could see it with the way Paille and Thornton and Gregory Campbell were playing in that game, too. Like,
they turned around. It was all Vancouver the first several minutes of that game until that line That line was the one that turned around the ice.
Every time they went over the boards, you're like, those guys came to win tonight. And you could tell, and it ended up just turning into that wave after wave every shift, and they just overwhelmed.
And then Bergie sneaks one in from the slot that was supposed to go on another stick. Yep. Kind of like stole it from somebody and shot it in. And that's why Longo was so fooled by it. He didn't think that was going to be the stick that shot the puck. And then Marchand does Marchand stuff. And then Bergeron, that penalty kill goal, he's sliding on his knees. I mean, the desperation with which that team sacrificed and played, and that's why they walk together. That's why everything was about that common goal. And, other teams feel that way in their hearts, but boy, when you see it, you know it, right?
Absolutely.
So that was one of those nights.
I'll never forget it. I'll never forget getting the last shuttle out of the Rogers Arena too, while the riots were going on.
They were gone by the time we got out there.
They told me I was going to have to walk home if I didn't get on that shuttle. There were like a bunch of NHL people were on right then and there.
So that's what happened with me and Chris Hurley and Rich Garvin. So a guy says to us, "Well, go up the hill that way. It's about 12 blocks to the hotel." We start walking. We're only 2 blocks into it. We run into the riot police. We ask them, "What do we do? The shuttles are done." And they said, "Go 2 blocks this way. You'll be fine." So we start walking up, we're fine. Things are dark. And then we can see some light coming from one of the blocks of the sides of the buildings. And then we hear some bell ringing, like a construction site, kind of bang, bang. I was like, what the heck is? And then all these people come pouring out of there with their eyes darting and this way, that way, this way, that way. Like they don't know which way to run away from whatever they're running from. I'm expecting Godzilla to come around the corner. And 2 things really hit me. One was this idiot in a Bruins jersey who was walking with his girlfriend who was telling him, we need to go. And he's, no, I want to see. He's walking toward it, And then there was this little mother, petite little thing with a baby carriage. And I'm thinking, I don't know where you are, honey, or where you're going, but God love you, and I hope you get there quick. Yeah. Because, boy, it was just a scary night. We broke into a jog up the hill a few times. By the time I got back to the hotel, I was sweating.
Mick, this confirms that I will never hang out with you again post-game when there's a riot after a game because
I know what you're going to say.
I was with you in Montreal at Game 7 when the number 1 seeded Canadians beat the number 8 seeded Bruins, and they were like riot squad police and cars on fire in Montreal as we were trying to walk to a restaurant for a post.
That's right. On Crescent, there was an overturned cruiser under the bonfire. And then the taillights were knocked out of like about 24 cruisers parked in a row. All the big storefronts were all boarded up, and the ones that weren't and had broken windows. I'm thinking like, this is just out of sight. This is nuts.
You seem to be the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time during these riots, post-playoff games, Mick. So
all you could do in that case is sit back with a glass of wine, right?
That's right.
Watch the city burn down.
One final thing before we sign off here, just salary cap situation for the Bruins. We talked about it a little bit. $5 million roughly in cap space, according to our friends at Puckpedia. They have enough defensemen right now. They have a surplus of defensemen. They have enough goaltending, and you could argue they could use one less or survive with one less with Brandon Bussey as a potential option in Providence.
I love Brandon Bussey. I'm on the Bussey bandwagon, but too soon.
Well, it's more, you know what? It's more of the Jeremy Swayman bandwagon than the Bussey bandwagon for me, because I think he can handle being a number 1 goalie at the NHL. And if Bussey is your backup, or if you bring in, somebody
I think that's more your move.
Yeah,
I think that's
bring in a veteran guy that may be in Providence.
So you recommend trading Linus to gain the $5 million?
I mean, I think that's something I would definitely look at. Especially
would you do that before trade? Would you do that before Taylor Hall?
Yeah, I would.
Not me. No way.
I would.
I'd start with Taylor Hall.
See, this is the thing. I have, Taylor Hall. I'd certainly.
They're overinvested on wing. They're already winger heavy. They're already 2 winger heavy. They got to get this. I would if I had a chance. This is if Bergie doesn't come back. What do you do? Yep. What are you doing? What's your plan?
Well, you have Zaka and Coyle, but I think they would try to find some kind of a veteran.
Ryan O'Reilly.
A veteran guy, yes. A Ryan O'Reilly, Hayes from Philadelphia, like somebody like that you could bring in and be a stopgap for a year or two. Like, especially if you can get a guy on a trade who a team's trying to offload and they're going to eat money and it's going to help you cap wise. Like, I think that's what you have to do. I don't think that's going to happen because I think Bergeron's probably going to come back for at least one more year. I think it's hard for me to believe that Patrice Bergeron's not going to play in the centennial season of the Boston Bruins, especially if otherwise he'd be going out with that game 7 being the last game of his NHL career. Like, I just put all that together with him still being, Patrice Bergeron, still being a Hall of Fame player, a winner, a great two-way center, all of those things. Like,
I don't
just
know how
think
much the herniated disc is going to have to say about that. And I don't know how much the family is going to have.
He had that injury before, though, a few years ago, and he recovered from it, though. I think that's one of the, I don't know if it's that as much as just the wear and tear of having played for almost 20 years, that's going to get him in the end, but I just think there's too much for him. There's too many reasons, I think, for him to continue to keep playing, to not, at least for one more year. I
hope he does. I mean, it's going to be a bad day.
Yes. Things are going to be, we talked about this. I think I talked about the tie last week. Things are going to be totally different with that team, top to bottom, when Patrice Bergeron's not there anymore.
It's going to have to be a whole new heart and soul, whole new definition of personality.
Culture, the day-to-day, the mindset, the philosophy, like the drive, the just the personality of the group and the personality of the team, like all of that is going to be completely different. There's going to be a huge vacuum when he's not there anymore. Frankly, I just don't think they're ready for it next year either.
You think, well, I'll give you one. I know I'm trying to make myself the interviewer here. do you think they're going to trade Grzelcyk?
Yes, I do. I
do too, based on what Don Sweeney did and did not say on the presser, because he said he identified the core of the D going forward as McAvoy, Lindholm, and Carlo. That's what we have to build around. And then he was asked about Grzelcyk's season specifically, and he said he had a really good season, and he did not cycle back to including him in any of that, which means that they know they have the decision to make for the budget.
Well, I also think at this point, having watched Tampa Bay win, having watched Vegas now win this year, having watched just recent history with the Stanley Cup playoffs and the NHL, you just really can't have 5'9", 170-pound defensemen playing significant roles for you when you get to playoff time. Like these teams that are winning.
When Torrey Krug became a top 3 defenseman, I knew the Bruins couldn't win.
Yes.
When Matt Grzelcyk became a top 3, I knew they couldn't win. You look at the Blues. I mean,
yes.
And they're the ones who did it the right way. They had a big 3 with Pietrangelo, Bouwmeester, and Parayko.
Yep.
And then they let Pietrangelo go. They got smaller on purpose. And what did they become? They lost their whole direction. And, so in as much as I like to appreciate those players and their ability, once they start making too much money, they have to play in those heavy minutes situations.
Yep.
Then it becomes problematic for your playoff lineup for matchup purposes.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just, you just look at the cup winners. It's that simple. Just look at their defenseman cores. They're all 6'2", 200-pound plus guys, 6'2" plus, 200-pound plus, just beasts that don't let you get anywhere near the net. Beasts that can take the pounding from other teams' forechecks and aren't going to flinch when they come at you, aren't going to hear the footsteps as much, are able to battle through things, even play hurt. I mean, the stuff that Aaron Ekblad was playing through since the first round of the playoffs is amazing to me. The level he was able to still play at while he's playing through that. But your bigger, tougher, stronger guys are going to be able to do that come playoff time. And I think it's just a tried and true formula. Mick, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it today. Awesome talking hockey with you.
We could have done this 5 hours.
You kidding me? We could have gone on and on forever. But
people would not have listened to it. That's
all right. They're going to listen for a strong hour. I can tell you that much, Mick. Let's thank our sponsors before we go. FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS network. It's Major League Baseball season now. There's obviously no NBA playoffs, no Stanley Cup playoffs, but still right now you can get a no sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. They have great promotions at FanDuel every day. It's a safe and secure app that's really easy to use. You get paid instantly when you win. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and get a no sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/Boston. And our other sponsor, of course, is Factor Meals, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Fresh, never frozen meals, ready and just 2 minutes, sometimes less than 2 minutes if you want to speed around real quick, but just around 2 minutes, which is, for a dinner, that's all you need is 2 minutes. But delicious, great meals, healthy meals, all kinds of options to choose from. So head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use code Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. That's factormeals.com/Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box at Factor Meals. Mick, I will see you at the rink. Everybody, thanks for listening. That's all for this week.